people associate irrationality with bad decisions. But the truth is that a decision under duress
Yeah.
oftentimes is the most rational decision a person
Yeah.
can make
At
in the
that moment.
moment to satisfy their immediate needs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Still We Heal Conversations the World Needs Now. Today's conversation is certainly a conversation the world needs now. It's about what it means to survive and what it takes to rebuild a life after everything has been stripped away. And many people are unfortunately experiencing that now due to many different circumstances. I am so honored and so proud to introduce John Figueroa. I'm going to read his just a short bio about him. There's a lot more that you can find on the links. And then we're going to get into this conversation. So thank you all for being here. John Figueroa is a consultant, author, and former nonprofit executive working at the intersection of reentry, juvenile justice, and artificial intelligence. He is the founder of Clutch Time Consulting, LLC, where he helps nonprofits, behavioral health providers, and workforce development organizations strengthen operations and apply AI in practical, real-world ways. You can find his bio on the link as well. He previously served as a regional executive director with Southwest Key Programs, overseeing multi-site youth justice programs across multiple counties, excuse me. Countries is coming. His background also includes direct service roles, trauma-informed care, and experience as an adjunct instructor at Buffalo State University, where he also served as an advisory board member for the MPA program. After spending over 16 years incarcerated, we're going to dig into that, including close to a decade in solitary and long-term confinement. John now focuses on helping organizations align programs with how people actually think, behave, and make decisions under pressure, which most of us are doing these days. He is the author of the Street Smart AI series. His most recent book, Street Smart AI, From Lockdown to Leveled Up, is a practical guide designed to help individuals navigate reentry in today's world. John is married, has 3 beautiful daughters, and currently lives in Arizona. Hi, John.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for having me, Leslie.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited for this conversation. Couldn't be more timely. So, I'm just going to start with humanizing you a little bit, going a little into your background, and then we're going to dig into what the topic is.
Absolutely.
Okay. So when you look back at your younger self, and you can just take this question wherever it takes you, what do you
hmm
see now that you couldn't see then?
One of the most important things I reflect on, Leslie, is that back when I was a young man growing up in the environment I was grew up in, I was operating with a lot of misinformation and a lack of information, correct information from the right people, the right role models, participation in education and everything else. One of the things that unfortunately for me impacted many of my decision making skills under duress in survival mode back when I was a young man was that I came from a tremendously dysfunctional family. Uh, Actually, I would say a complete broken home. I
Hmm.
was in and out of prison during the majority of my youth, right up until she passed away when I was 15 years old. So I never really had my mother involved in my life. I never met my dad, never even knew his name. And fortunately, I was raised by an aunt, but unfortunately, I often felt like she was more of a roommate as opposed to a mother figure, as opposed to a true guardian. I never want to say anything negative about her because at the end of the day, I understand now that my aunt was doing the best she knew how to do with what she had, which wasn't much. And she was also struggling with addiction herself and other issues. So I was fortunate that for the first 11 years of my life, I did have a roof over my head. I did have clothes on my back. But oftentimes, the residuals of that was that I had to fend for myself from a very, very young age. I know it's often heard sometimes and even, romanticized in some ways, but I literally began my life of crime as an 8-year-old boy stealing to feed myself. I would panhandle on the streets and oftentimes not blaming adults, but rudely get a job or beat it or some type of negative derogatory statements when I made an effort to panhandle. When that didn't work out, I literally began stealing so that I wouldn't be starving all day. Not to mention there was other extenuating circumstances. I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in Alphabet City, and it was at that time in the
Yeah.
80s when I was growing up, it was considered the heroin capital of the world. There was so much violence, there was so many drugs, there was so much crime, and I have these vivid memories of when I left my apartment that I lived in the Lillian Wall houses. It wasn't uncommon to go into the staircase and find people smoking crack or shooting heroin or having sex. It wasn't uncommon to walk into the elevators and there was a stench of urine and dog poop. It wasn't uncommon to see crime, people being robbed in the lobbies or in front of my building. Those are the type of environments that were contributing to me feeling as if I was operating in survival mode from a very young age.
And
Not
you
to
were.
mention, yeah, absolutely. And not to mention what was going on inside my home, where, many of the adults that were coming in and out of my home were using drugs, they were partying, they were sexually active, just being completely exposed to a wild environment. And I chuckle sometimes when I say it because as a husband and a father now, I can't imagine exposing my daughters to anything like that. So there was a lot of things. Environment played a huge part in the decision making I was involved in at the time as a young man with a very, very limited frame of reference, Leslie. And I can tell you that I believe hands down that if I had better access to better people, to better information, to better resources, at least it would have been a contributing factor going the other way.
Of
It
course.
oftentimes seems to me like if I was destined to lose, I gotta be honest, that was one of the things that lived with me for many years until I snapped out of it and hit that very, very rock bottom. I felt as if I was destined to lose and to be the bad guy.
Can you say more about that? Because I think obviously a lot of our youth growing up in these
Mm-hmm.
circumstances feel
Mm-hmm.
that way. So I think it's important. Can you, I know it's hard to put words to this kind of thing, but what made you feel like you were the bad guy?
Well, I can unpack it, and I've unpacked it over the years, and I'm humble and proud to say I was in therapy for many years. I've done a lot of work, internal work, to be able to understand how my past shaped my present and how it will contribute to my future. So, one of the things I remember often growing up, even in my own home, was feeling rejected. My other siblings, they all knew my mom. They all knew their dads. They all had dads and moms. When
Mm,
my siblings were taken into foster care and I was left behind, I was always considered my mother's son. They would use her name, my mother's son, the last one that was still in the Figueroa family, but the rest had already been dispersed. Another thing was my family had a lot of negative associations towards my mom. So it, every time she had a child, my grandmother gave one of her children to one of her other daughters or sons. So all of my siblings, we all went to our aunts and uncles because my mother was strung out on heroin and in and out of prison. So every time she had a new baby, another burden, another kid to
yeah,
take in and
yeah.
feed. So in addition to that, when I started going out into the community, and I don't know how it started, but even in the first and second grade, I remember the teachers knowing my mother was in jail. Other kids' parents knew and told their kids. So I was the kid that had a mother in jail, that had a mother that was a heroin addict. I was a kid that, oh, for no sincere reason that I could recall, because I don't ever remember being the type of kid that was trying to be a negative influence on others, but I was the kid that parents told their children to stay away from.
Wow.
I remember all of these messages being reinforced. And even as I got older, and this transitions into one of my oftentimes given keynote addresses about leadership and transformation, for some reason, other kids always wanted to follow me. They always wanted to do what I was doing because I was one of the first young kids leaving the project, running to the South Street Seaport, going to Chinatown, Stuyvesant Town, jumping on a train, going to Spanish Harlem, going to Sugar Hill, going all these places, 8, 9, 10 years old. And when I would come back to the projects with these stories, these kids would be excited and they always see me going. And you want to know the sad part? I started going because I never even felt accepted in my own community.
Hmm.
And that led to a lot of fights. That led to all types of issues in school. That led to me rejecting the educational system because I felt targeted by teachers and other kids making fun of me. And I had so many fights, and I can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's where the sense of rejection came from because the foundations of my life as a young person
That's a
rejected
lot.
me.
That's a lot of rejection as a young person,
Oh
and an
yeah.
enormous amount of resilience that you didn't just buckle under, and that you found a way to go to all these different places as a little kid. And a lot of kids could never figure that out at that age,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I guess so.
yeah, 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 for real.
I think a lot about that. I think a lot about resilience. I think a lot about, the application of resilience, and there's a work in progress, but I think resilience is inherently wired into all of us. It just comes a point where you're able to tap into it or you're unable to. And a lot of
Yeah.
people collapse under the experiences of life, not realizing that in essence we all were inherently born with
Yes.
resilience.
Yes. We're going to get more specifically into that in just a little
Absolutely.
while. Yeah. Um. So I want to get into the moment everything changed. Well, didn't I'm not sure everything changed, but can you take us back to the moment your life shifted when you entered the system?
Absolutely. I was 11 years old at the time when I first entered the juvenile justice system. As I shared, I was living with my aunt, who I was thankful that I actually had someone who kept me out of the system. And it's ironic, just to point back to that statement, my siblings considered me the lucky one. That's the crazy part about it. They consider
Yeah.
me the lucky one because I was able to stay with our family and they were all sent to group homes and foster care and stuff. But um, when I was 11 years old, my aunt filed a PINS petition. That's a persons in need of supervision petition with the New York Family Courts in Lower Manhattan on Chambers Street. I was in and out that court for years, and the court event and the Penn's petition related primarily to me staying out late, not wanting to go to school because I was having all the problems with the teachers and everybody else, and I didn't consider it running away, but honestly, I always what was there really to go home to? Oftentimes there wasn't any food, so I would stay away from home for
Hmm.
days at a time. Were other young people like me who were homeless or struggling or living in the trains or living wherever they could find a spot. And I chose to struggle with people and young people rather, not from my community
Well,
who
where
were
you felt
experiencing
accepted, where you felt you weren't
exactly.
being judged and rejected. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Of
So
course.
so I so that's what I did oftentimes. So she filed the PINS petition. The court granted the PINS warrant, and at the age of 11, I was taken into custody. I was sent to they kept me at court and family court and sent me to a group home in Brooklyn temporarily before sending me to St. Mary's Children and Family Services in Syosset, New York. I know they changed their name and stuff, but this was a residential center, a Catholic run residential center in Syosset, New York, and I spent my first entire year in that residential center. So it didn't start from it didn't end there. I came out with supervision. I wasn't compliant. I continued to stay away. I was going to school at the time, but not really participating, not really interested in school.
Hmm.
They placed me back into custody, not for any crimes or anything like that. This is still under the PINS petition. And I ended up staying in the juvenile justice system in New York State. It was known as the Division for Youth for
Hmm.
4 years, right up until I was 15 years old, several months shy of my 16th birthday.
What did the staff and the people there treat you like?
It was a little different. At this point, I have to be honest, I became a little more responsible for the
Mm,
feedback I was getting from
mm,
people. I had a tremendous chip on my shoulder. I gotta be frank with you. I was
of
angry, I
course.
was lost.
Yeah,
And when I
of
started
course.
going in, when I went into these environments with other kids like me who were angry, who were lost, who were aggressive, the fighting and the violence, just that's where I really started exhibiting violence in my life towards other people who were just as angry, going through the same things as me. And we have all this pent up energy,
Mhm.
sometimes being forced to be roommates in cottages and small environments where you're spending day in and day out with them, and a lot of different fights. And this was also a time in my life where misdirected anger, but I started seeing staff as part of the system. I
Mhm.
started thinking of staff as my enemies, and that led to a lot of altercations with staff, a lot of disrespect, a lot of violence, me getting restrained, and it goes on and on. And it was a horrible time, but I started creating this reputation for myself in those environments to the point where I wore staff down so much with my aggressiveness, with the issues I was causing, that they pretty much raised their hands and let me do what I wanted to do. That's how bad it became with me. Same thing with my peers. Like I fought so many times with so many people, hit people with chairs,
Well,
all types of
if you were in a different environment, you could have been, a great athlete, right? You could have channeled, you could have,
potentially,
yeah,
potentially,
yeah,
potentially, potentially. And so in those environments, I had to take accountability because of everything I had dealt with, and not being able to communicate it, not being able
of
to
course.
cope
No one,
with
no
those
one taught
things.
you to communicate. I mean,
Absolutely,
yeah,
So I
yeah.
created a very horrible reputation for myself as far as this kid is violent, he's a lost cause. And that's when I started hearing very early on in those residential settings, you're going to end up spending your life in prison. Before you're 18, you're going to be dead or you're going to be in jail. And it's crazy how many of those prophecies became self-fulfilling because I started saying those things about myself. I stopped expecting. I had heard so many times that I wouldn't live to the age of 18 that I started believing it.
Well, of course, that's children do, and much less destructive things than that. Kids, you just
Absolutely.
believe what people say. Even adults, we're still
Exactly,
very
exactly, exactly.
vulnerable to what people think of us. Yeah.
And that leads
Yeah.
back into to how I started with how when I was correlating the feeling rejected my entire life, how I also felt that I was destined to be the bad guy, that I was a bad guy.
What did you need in that moment that you didn't receive?
Everything that I give my children now, love, attention, support, reassuring, affection,
Safety,
safety, of course, that's underscores all of that. Safety, stability, healthy
respect.
perspective, respect, all the things that I parent my children,
It's
and
amazing
it
that
may
you
be
can do that.
selfish, but I parent my children in the ways I wish I had been parented.
No, I think that that's incredible that you're able to do that. And if anybody here's listening who came up through foster care and juvenile and everything, if they had been
Hmm.
given all these things, their lives would be completely different. Yeah,
Absolutely,
of course.
absolutely.
Of course. Um, so let's go on to decisions under duress.
Hmm.
What does decision making look like when you're in survival mode? Just wherever that question takes you.
Decision, and this is for everyone, actually. It's not just for someone who's been in prison, because
Sure.
I work with many, many people, and over the years in my career, managing teams, college educated from every academic level, from a doctorate on down to a GED. Oftentimes, when people make the worst decisions, there's a direct correlation with making those decisions under duress, whether it's financial duress, whether it's emotional duress.
Yeah.
There's typically a friction point of duress when people make the worst decisions that they make, whether they're influenced by alcohol, substances, whether they're influenced by their peer, whether they're influenced by having to pay their mortgage. I think
Yeah.
that people associate irrationality with bad decisions. But the truth is that a decision under duress
Yeah.
oftentimes is the most rational decision a person
Yeah.
can make
At
in the
that moment.
moment to satisfy their immediate needs. And that's one of the recurring themes that I realize in my life, and I've been able to unpack and really see how duress contributes or contributed to me making bad decisions was that when it's all said and done, I always reacted prematurely to a situation that was making me feel strong emotions.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's
Exactly.
duress.
Exactly. Let's stop right there for a second for people to take that in. Because it's feeling under duress. You have to make, you're so stressed, you have to make that decision right away. You think you do. You think you do. You probably don't, but you think you do. And then some really, really bad things can come from, life altering things can come from that. Yes. Premature decisions. Yes.
And I think about that as now, as an adult, as a husband, as a father, as someone who has lost jobs and didn't have much savings as a backup plan. In my reentry, since my incarceration, I've had to make many decisions under duress. But being able to reflect on the past, being able to reflect on the results of the decisions I previously made when I had a whole entirely different mindset, has guided my decision making process under duress now. We're all masters of our own fate, and as much as we attribute, stressors and triggers and everything else to the external environment, I'm learning and I'm trying to practice that at the end of the day, I am the master of my fate, right? I have to be able to make decisions that are in my best interest and in the best interest of my children, my wife, my family, and my community. And ultimately, we have to make decisions that are going to contribute to our own self-actualization. Because at the end of the day, we really only hurt ourselves. Every bad decision I made, even when I've hurt others, as much remorse and sadness I feel over those type of bad decisions, it may sound selfish, it may sound wrong, but I've ended up hurting myself the most in the end.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what decisions under duress ultimately translate to. You create barriers in your life, you hurt yourself, you set yourself back 5, 10, 15, 20 steps. And ultimately, when you look at it with a clear lens, with the 2020 eyesight, Leslie, you see that those decisions you made under duress, had you been a little patient, had you used a different coping skill, had you just sat and waited it out, you could have made a better decision shortly after.
Yes. Very, very important
And
words.
that's been a repeated theme in my life when I was making bad decisions. As a young person, when I was making bad decisions to steal and feed myself, I was making that decision under duress. I could have went to the store counter and asked the guy. I never did. I'm hungry. Do you have anything? I could have maybe I could have figured it out. And I know it's hard to put that on a young person now,
Of
but I'm
course
just
it is.
saying,
Yeah.
that at the end of the day, it's applicable to all of us.
Yeah, because when you're under duress, you don't think you have options or choices.
There you go.
You just don't.
There you
So it's so
go.
important to somehow know that even under the worst duress, you do have an option. You do have, they might be very limited,
And
but
the option has to always be to not make matters worse.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
your last option. That even if there is inaction, even if there is nothing else that you can do, you have an obligation to not make matters worse in your life. Life is hard enough.
absolutely. Absolutely. And especially if people are under the kind of duress of absolute survival, it's
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. I'm actually in Sugar Hill. That's where so you can hear the
Oh,
sirens and so
uh-huh,
sorry
uh-huh.
about
Hey,
that.
I explored the whole, Leslie, I would get on the subway early in the morning and just pick a location that I was going to explore. I'll take the F train all the way to Coney Island. I'll take the 6 uptown. I'll take the L over here, the D over here. I just would explore a different route every day. I'll pick a route on that map. I always got on the train on Delancey and Essex. I will go down that thing, and unfortunately, sorry to confess, guys, hop the turnstile, right? Or slide under it, go right to the map and decide what area of New York City am I going to explore today.
Well, you always had curiosity and desire to know things, so that
Oh
that was a
yeah,
saving grace,
oh yeah, oh yeah,
right? A lot
absolutely.
of people give that up when they feel like they're under
Hmm.
under so much. Um, what would you want people to understand before they judge someone's worst decision?
First, none of us are the sum total of all of our worst decisions or all of our best decisions. At the end of the day, I'm learning as an individual who's grown wiser with age and lived experience and a lot of study and interacting with people. It's very, very, very easy for us to point our fingers when we can't imagine ourselves in similar circumstances
Right.
as the person who made the bad decision. I've been fortunate in life to meet a lot of people who have confessed to me during conversations or through connecting with me that I never thought that I could make a decision like that I never thought that I could be in them shoes, including when I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated with attorneys. I was incarcerated with college basketball players. I was incarcerated with business owners who were wealthy. I was incarcerated with a huge variety of individuals that came from diverse backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. There's this assumption that everybody's in prison is dirt poor, for committing the pettiest of petty crimes or the gruesome or more violent crime. But I was in prison with a diverse group of characters. And many of the conversations I would have from a person who never had access to resources, like when I met a business owner. He was a millionaire and he ended up committing a murder to protect his business. And I said, yo, but what would make you even like for money? Why would you want to kill somebody else if you already had a lot of money? He didn't want to lose half of his business. And he explained it to me and he shared it with me. But he also underscored the conversation with, I never thought I would be in prison. I'm used to living in, he lived on Long Island. I'm used to living in big houses. I own boats. I do this. But look, I can only spend $55 every 2 weeks like you now. I'm wearing greens, the state uniforms in New York State. I'm exactly in the same position as you are. And I never thought that I would be here because I look down on you people. You see, so that's an example of how people who can't imagine themselves making those decisions come to the chickens come home to roost, so to speak. And I'm not saying that statement alone is going to get people to think about their biases and judgments. You live long enough in life, Leslie, you start realizing that anything can happen to anybody. No situation is too far from anybody else's doorstep. It can happen to any of us. A lot of it can happen to us. I know a lot of people who've ended up in prison because they were driving under the influence and they ended up killing somebody. An attorney I knew, an attorney who sat at my table and ate with me. Everybody else rejected him because he wasn't part of our quote unquote culture. But guess what? I befriended this guy. I wanted to learn from him. I was curious about him. So don't judge.
Yep. Try to understand, right?
If you can, a lot of people talk about empathizing, right? Try to understand, and we can't be so surface level. Even myself, I'll be lying if I told you that even towards at times with the people I work with who were just failing excessively and triggering me with frustration and aggravation because we're not getting the result that we see. You think I haven't had bias in my mind and judgment in my mind?
Sure, we all do.
So it's a constant exercise,
of course,
to right. And sometimes things cause such a visceral reaction in us based on any given type of conduct or crime or situation that automatically our lens shut out. I would never do this. That person doesn't deserve mercy, or that person doesn't deserve a second chance, or that person deserves this and that. Whatever the case is, you let it settle a little bit and try to truly empathize and put yourself in another person's shoes, or at least imagine what it felt like to be in that person's shoes. I think you walk away with a different perspective. Most of us.
I agree with you mostly, especially for people who are facing all kinds of circumstances, but people who try to do harm consciously or doing harm, I have a very hard time. Yeah.
I do too. I do too. And I'm not speaking of individuals who are exhibiting malice. I'm not speaking
I just wanted to clarify that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm not referencing individuals who are evil, who are conducting malice and intentionally hurting people. We're speaking from a perspective of making decisions under duress, the things that shape us and contribute to how we're living our lives in transformation. So just so that we always understand, I'm speaking of individuals on the right side of the conversation right now. But of course, I have that visceral response too. I'm a girl dad. When I hear anything on the news about kids being abused, kids being hurt, I saw something this morning about a young lady on the news. She was taken into custody by ICE. Her husband is a soldier. They separated her
I
from her
saw that.
child, and her child ends up getting abused. My wife and I was watching it, getting emotional, just
Of
about
course.
crying.
Of course.
So I'm glad we clarified that too,
Yeah, yeah,
Leslie.
that's just important because it's people who are
Absolutely,
consciously and
of
proactively doing
course.
evil and malice. It's a whole different conversation. So let's go on to life inside, losing and holding on to self.
Hmm.
A lot of people are going through a lot of loss and having a difficult time holding on to themselves. So, what was the hardest part of being incarcerated, not physically, but emotionally or psychologically?
This is a horrible recollection, but I like to think about it now, not so much before. The truth of the matter is, when I became incarcerated at the age of 16, I
Hmm.
was sent to the Adolescent Retention Detention Center, ARDC. That was
Yeah, I've done
C-74
workshops there. Yeah.
on Rikers Island. And
Yep.
to be honest with you, the level of viciousness and violence and malice and evil that I encountered in that environment, it changed me forever, and it changed me for a long time, preventing my own transformation.
Tell me more
That
about
in,
that. Tell me, can
Yeah,
you take that
yeah,
along?
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna elaborate. I want to elaborate a little bit about this because a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
So the truth of the matter is that when I went to Rikers Island, I was already in a gang. What gang? That's not important. I was in a gang already on Rikers Island at the time. There were race riots. There was all types of stuff going on where blacks were cutting Spanish, Spanish was cutting blacks. This unit was for all black inmates. This unit was for all Spanish inmates. I was part of a predominantly African American gang. So we touched back into the rejection thing a little bit. See how it continues to play out? But since I was Spanish, they sent me to a housing unit that housed primarily Spanish inmates. So the gangs there were Spanish gangs and they were in control. This was the Latin Kings, the Nietas, La Familia, a couple of other gangs. So when I walk in, whenever you walk into a unit on Rikers Island, any unit, there's always going to be people who are controlling the housing area that are going to come to the gate. They came to the gate and they asked me what gang I was a part of, and I told them. And they said, "Well, you coming in here?" I said, "Yeah, I'm coming in here. Why not?" And sure enough, the minute I walked through the door, the violence started. I got jumped by a bunch of guys, hit with mop ringers and scrub brushes, and it happened. 2 days on Rikers Island, first house I walk into, encounter with violence. From there, the violence never stopped, to be frank with you. I was slashed a couple of times, jumped, I slashed a bunch of people. Ultimately, and this is why I try not to speak about it as much. I ended up committing violence against so many inmates on Rikers Island that they sent me to solitary and they labeled me as a predicate slasher. So everywhere I went, Leslie, I went with a correction officer and a captain, escorted, shackled, handcuffed with two restraints over my hands behind my back. When I went to court, same thing. I was in pins by myself. I was wearing them two restraints and chains wrapped around me all day. If I had to use the bathroom, they would just release one hand, and my hands from being in the two restraints all day will be swollen. They smell like dirty socks, and a lot of pain, a lot of shoulder pain that ended up living with me many years later. But to make a long story short, it changed me because it exposed me to a viciousness inside of myself that I never thought that I had.
Yeah.
Because previous to going to Rikers Island, I wasn't a violent kid. I fought. Usually it was regular scrapping that people go through in the community. right? You get picked on, you fight, whatever the case may be. But I never had used a weapon against anyone. I didn't walk around carrying guns. I wasn't looking to hurt people. Usually, the violence I was engaged in were either fist fights or people trying to jump me, stuff like that. On Rikers Island, it was a different story. They was playing razor tag with people's faces. In New York City, you walk around and you see somebody with a big slash on their face, you likely know where it came from. Rikers Island specifically. Rikers Island was more vicious than upstate where people were doing life already. This is only the detention center. People who are detainees on Rikers
Yeah.
Island.
Right.
And the level of violence just, and it changed me, and it saddens me when I look back on it, because the truth of the matter is, I asked myself, could I have done things differently? But in being just as honest, Leslie, I was so terrified on that bus ride to Rikers Island after everything I had heard. Big brother had been there, uncles had been there. Every time somebody came home from Rikers Island, they was telling stories on the block and the projects, and you just had this image in your mind of how terrifying it was. I almost pooped myself on the bus to Rikers Island.
Of course.
But I also, I'll be frank, I had a conversation with myself. I told myself, I don't want to go there and be a victim. I don't want to go to Rikers Island and get cut and stabbed. And I'm not going to go be anybody's prey. And I made the decision on that bus heading to Rikers Island. But look what happened to me. First day there, walking into a house, I was jumped and beaten and all this other stuff. And it just triggers you and it changes you. And that level of violence and that
Of course, it
mindset,
changes you. Of course.
it really does. It
I mean, they
really,
talk
really
about
does.
moral injury with our veterans, our combat veterans who had to do all kind of
Mm-hmm.
things, and how that just creates such moral injuries. It's the same sort of thing, right?
Same concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it changed me. And it took many years for me to dial that back, for me to process that, for me to understand why I was reacting like that. And it's just like, and I know we're going to get a little more into the solitary confinement piece. It's just like the moment I had this realization after a moment of violence in solitary confinement.
So, so let me go to that, and then I want to go back to some other questions. Can you help us understand what solitary confinement actually feels like
Solitary
emotionally?
con- oh, absolutely, absolutely. Solitary confinement to me more than anything else felt disorienting. It disoriented me and emotional. Forget about the external circumstances of. I mean, there was days I forgot truthfully, what month, what week we were in. I was sentenced to 12 years in solitary confinement, Leslie. I ended up doing 6 straight. Throughout my incarceration, I did another year here, year keep lock over there. But I did 6 straight years in solitary confinement. And I remember emotionally not being able to understand why I would wake up angry out of the blue. Literally, I
You
could
didn't
get
understand? You didn't
I didn't.
understand what?
No, I
Wow.
didn't. I really didn't. I really didn't. Just see, but and even your look, I can tell you, this is why sometimes you got to step back. That environment had become normal to me already. I had already spent in juvenile institutions. I had spent time in solitary. On Rikers Island, I spent the majority of my stay on Rikers Island in solitary confinement. The environment itself, I had already physically adapted to it and stabilized. I know it sounds weird to people. I had stabilized because I had been in that environment so long, or exposed to it and groomed for it, let me say. Right? A little different. I had never did 6 years. But I couldn't understand my emotions and why I would react a certain way, even when I got good news. Somebody sharing progress, somebody sent me a picture, the occasional letters I got, and I'm supposed to be happy and I'll be angry about completely different things. So my emotions were disorientated. My ability to think and process information for the first couple of years at least became very weak. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus on anything, and that bled into emotional disorientation and
Yeah. I
emotional
mean, everyone
dysregulation
knows
for
how
me.
important connection is for mental health, and like
Oh yeah.
ongoing, regular human connection with each other. Everybody talks about that all the time, right? So the
They
whole,
talk about it now, but it wasn't such a big conversation when I was in the system. It wasn't
well, it's
a
still
lot
not
of
in the
the,
system. It's still not
yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
system.
Well,
I'm-
remember this. Remember this. In fairness, I know specifically in New York State, where I did my solitary confinement time, it was a different era than it is now. There's a whole bunch of laws change related to solitary, how long people can be in there. When I was in there, they could send you to solitary confinement for 3 years for an assault. They could give you 10 years in solitary confinement. They can't do that generally now. So that's what I'm referencing to as far as the conversation of mental health in correlation to deterioration and special housing units wasn't a big talking point the way it is now.
oh, it
So
is a
so
talking point now. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
no, it is a talking point. It is a big talking point. There's been a lot of laws changed due to primarily, mental health reasons and treatments and I mean they've tried since the early 2000s, but it's culminating now where laws are actually passed on how long individuals can be kept in isolation 30 days at a time, 60 days at a time. When I was in the system, that didn't exist. I've been home 14 years, so a lot of things are starting to move towards changing those environments. So solitary confinement was a horrible experience, especially for a young, impressionable mind. It
So
broke me,
how
Leslie.
did you hold on? What helped? What is there anything that helped you to hold on? How did you?
Well, for the first couple of years, I wasn't able to hold on. I deteriorated. I lashed out. All types of ridiculousness and well, ultimately, and I like to give credit where credit is due. I'm not a religious person. I'll confess to that. But I started reading the Bible. I learned about Jesus. I started educating myself. I started asking for different types of books. I started really wanting to change because after an incident where again, once again, committing violence against another person, I had an awakening. I looked at myself in the mirror, and quite frankly, I didn't like the person I saw.
Hmm.
And I was 22 years old at that time, Leslie. I still had a significant amount of time on my sentence and a significant amount of time in solitary. And I just had an honest conversation with myself about what I had become, how I was responsible for what I had become. And here goes the resilience. The resilience tapped back in. I said, this can't be me. This can't be the end of me. This cannot be what I ultimately end up being.
How did that shift? It just shifted. Just all. Did
It wasn't just a shift. Even underscore my entire life, and I guess it probably contributed to me being so curious and leaving the areas I was in, was I always felt there had to be more to this. This can't be it. The suffering, the crime, the drugs, the sadness, the hurt, nobody loving me. This can't be it. That always lived with me. And I associated with a light. The older I got, the more circumstances I experienced, the more bad decisions I made, the more consequences I suffered. It dimmed the light. It dimmed it. But it never extinguished it. It never extinguished it.
so how did you hold on to it? And how did you hold on to your identity?
I didn't have an identity.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know who I was, Leslie.
Uh-huh.
I had no family culture. I knew I didn't like the person I had become. I had no identity.
Well, you were
And if
you were
I
just
did have,
surviving. It doesn't sound like you had much.
well, well, if let me take that back. Let me rewind.